Hey everyone, my name is April. Welcome back to Atypical Understanding, where we dive into the things that make us and others tick. We share our journeys and what we are learning about how to improve our lives and become the change we want to see and have the impact that we crave. Today's video is about sadness and digging deeper into the messages that sadness may be trying to send. Our starting point is the emotions wheel. This video is another part in a series of looking up the emotions on the emotions wheel to help us better connect and understand the emotion and build up our emotional literacy. I'm going to skip a lengthy intro for sadness and jump right into the definitions. I feel like I've covered the intros so far. So lonely is being without company, cut off from others. Lonely breaks off into two emotions on the wheel of isolated and abandoned. Isolated is separate from others. Separate from others. Abandoned is left without needed protection, care, or support. Have you ever heard the saying that sometimes the loneliest people are surrounded by the most people? Sometimes there's a misunderstanding of loneliness that leads to a little bit of difficulty in identifying it. If we are literally always alone, then it could be easier for us to identify that we are lonely. But if we're constantly surrounded by people who we just aren't connecting with, or we're unable to understand, or who just don't understand us, it can be very lonely. If you're different from those around you, whether it's physical appearance or ideologies, it can lead to a lot of sadness, and even after long periods of time, even some depression. I'm not saying that everyone around you needs to think the same as you, but it can be very beneficial if we can find a couple of people to feel truly connected to. And if we're feeling this type of loneliness, reach out to groups or organizations you might want to be a part of. Find your people, or at least a person that you can be yourself around and be a very honest version of yourself. Abandonment feels different, as in there's an understanding of some sort that you were in an arrangement with someone else, a parent, a child relationship, partner, spouse arrangement, a deep friendship, or maybe just someone you planned an engagement with, like even a blind date. Abandonment can often lead into traumatic responses. If you feel that you may be struggling with unhealed abandonment issues, it's very important to work through this, because even minor instances of someone kind of letting you down, it can really spiral. The most helpful work for me was going through Pete Walker's book about CPTSD and learning how to anger through and do some reparenting. But sometimes we feel abandoned by people in our life who really don't owe us anything at all. We just wanted them to take care of something for us, and they didn't. While you are exploring this, you should ask yourself the important question of what it is that you were wanting from that person. Is it really their responsibility? Is it something you could and should be doing for yourself? Are you abandoning yourself? Self-abandonment is a really interesting topic that I do want to dive deeper into at a later date. The next group of words: vulnerable, capable of being emotionally or physically wounded, open to an attack or damage. On a personal level, I often feel vulnerable when I'm overwhelmed or when I'm unable to attend to things in the way that I would like to. I feel vulnerable when I'm physically tired, or in a situation when I'm just outsized or confused. One clue that someone or yourself is feeling vulnerable is you're hugging yourself, or you're hugging your belongings, you're holding on tighter. Feeling vulnerable is not always a negative thing. And building lasting connections with others by being vulnerable with them creates intimacy. And having intimacy is a way to lessen the amount of time that you feel lonely. So understanding your vulnerability and making good decisions about when to lean into it and stay vulnerable, or when to make the effort to reduce your vulnerability, is really important. Victimized, to subject to deception or fraud. I can't think of any situation where you would want to lean into being victimized. If someone is truly victimizing you, then you are in an element of deception. If you are willingly participating, by definition, you are losing your victim status, and that's something you may need to define for yourself. If you were a victim of a crime, you were a victim and you did not choose. You did not choose or decide it. And if at any point you needed to cooperate in a short-term situation to maybe protect yourself or others, you were still certainly a victim. Being victimized in this way can once again often lead to trauma issues, and these should be properly grieved and dealt with, ideally with a therapist or a counselor. Fragile. Easily broken or destroyed. Feeling fragile, on the other hand, is sometimes because of external factors: illness, overwhelm, emotional dysregulation. But sometimes, as we mentioned earlier, it can be a positive. It can be good to take a minute to trust someone with ourselves and see if we are feeling fragile. It can be an exercise to give small, manageable bits of ourselves to others, to learn to trust. If we feel fragile, we may be noticing how small we are in a big world and need to come back to ourselves to build ourselves up again. Maybe we only feel fragile because we have lost our confidence or lost our trust in the universe or self. The flip side to never feeling vulnerable, fragile, or victimized would be being invincible. Since we know we are not invincible, it is only healthy and natural for us to feel vulnerable, fragile, or victimized sometimes. Explore it, especially if it is recurring, or especially if it's recurring frequently. You may need to make some changes, or you may need to just accept it as a healthy part of a healthy range of emotions. Despair is the utter loss of hope. I like to define hope because hope is just very special. Hope is to cherish a desire with anticipation, to want something to be true, to expect it with confidence, to trust that it's there. Despair implies that something has happened and that you have suffered a loss, whether real or imagined. Despair leads into grief and powerlessness on the wheel. Grief is a deep and poignant distress. I have grieved so many things in life. My first instinct with grief is to associate it with the loss of life, but really it can be anything. Loss of a dream, loss of a friend, loss of an opportunity, loss of a clear path forward. Grieving is an incredible process, and in many cases it is the only way forward. So I would encourage you, if you are feeling grief, to allow it and feel it and move through it. Insert lots of crying and probably some anger here. And if you can't seem to move through it alone, work with someone. As always, if your distressing emotions become overwhelming, please seek assistance. There are many hotlines that can help you. There are online therapy plans, there are resources, and so many of these will help you if you truly cannot afford assistance. They may help you find money, scholarships, or other resources. Powerless is devoid of strength or resources. So similar to fragile, but powerless seems more concrete, as if the thing you fear is more likely to happen or has happened already. So powerless feels like the problem is bigger than you, or you just don't know how to work on it. So next time you're feeling powerless, really try to figure out what feels bigger than you. Is it a problem that you have? Maybe you can break off a tiny piece and handle that. Or maybe you can find someone with a similar problem and you guys can join forces. Sometimes we really feel powerless in a life event or a weather event, but we can start to take back our own power in the aftermath by one small step at a time. One foot in front of the other is one of my favorite mantras for getting out of a crappy or complex situation in which I feel powerless. You all seem to be really enjoying me breaking these into smaller bite-sized pieces, so I am going to stop here and save the rest of the sadness words for the next video. As always, I love when you further elaborate in the emotion, or in the comments on the emotions that we discussed. Emotions are incredibly complex, and it's very helpful to hear a broad perspective. Thank you guys so much for stopping by, and I will see you again soon. Bye!